Do you have us on the same? Nope, you have us flipped. You showing Matt Snyder. You got to take care of it. There you go.
Welcome back to the D3 Datacast. It's conference tournament time. We got a little bit of a taste of that with some conferences starting their conference tournaments this past week. But there's just like a handful of regular season games left. We've got Mary Washington's going out to play Santa Cruz before the C2C tournament starts. We've got Emory and Carnegie Mellon got a makeup game. We've got that final UAA weekend. But I think other than that, everything else is conference tournament play. It's an exciting time of year. You're going to be wanting to stick with the D3 Datacast, to follow it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. If you like what we're doing here, you like this episode, hit that thumbs up button. That'll help us a lot. It's great to be here. Great to be back with you for another exciting week, Matt.
Yeah, and I love conference tournament week. To me, it's almost as fun as opening weekend of the NCAA tournament. But the sad part is we get a bunch of teams starting to drop off. Maybe like the Tuesday when there's a bunch of quarterfinals. That kind of feels like one of the last big days when there's just tons of D3 hoops going on. There's a lot of fun games because we get a bunch of Saturday finals. But it's just the craziness of maybe 200 games out there that kind of goes by the wayside. So that's the only bit of the downside to this really, really fun part of the year.
That's true. We got a bunch of conference tournaments we're going to dive into this week. But first, before we get there, we got a few things we like to use to look back at the week that was. We've got our 4-point play. We've got a new top 25 ballot from you. But let's jump right into the 4-point play. Lead us off for what caught your eye in the North last week.
Yeah, Zach, we had some drama in the NCAC race as Denison pulled out a squeaker over Ohio Wesleyan. 71-70 was that final score, and Denison then claimed the outright NCAC crown. This game was tied in the final seconds. Ohio Wesleyan actually had the ball in their possession, but their players slipped and lost control of the ball, which led to a steal by Denison as they were charging down the court in those final seconds to get their own attempt up. Owen Gianoulias was fouled with 1 second remaining. He made 1 of 2 from the line, and that gave Denison the 1-point lead. It also avoided the conference championship split with John Carroll. Denison ended 1 game ahead of the Blue Streaks, so outright champs for Denison, and they do it at the free throw line with 1 second remaining against Ohio Wesleyan.
It feels a little bit like a microcosm of how that NCAC race went over the last few weeks. It looks like maybe Denison had a little bit of space, and then that closed. And here at the wire, they get the NCAC crown just as they got that win at the wire. That was a fun race to watch. Going to be a great conference tournament to watch as well. Matt, in the North, I'm going to step into conference tournament play. While most conferences around Division III were wrapping up the regular season, such as the NCAC that you just talked about, the madness was already underway in the Empire 8, and the headliner there being the 8 seed St. John Fisher, knocking out top-seeded Sage. But the Gators were far from the conference's only team to see an early exit, with 2 seed Nazareth knocked out by Cuca, Brockport beating SUNY Poly in the 4-5 game. That's 3 of the top 4 seeds in the Empire 8 failing to reach the semifinals. And Matt, that paves the way for Geneseo to have a potential path through the Empire 8 tournament without having to see a team seeded higher than 5th. Chaos is reigning in the Empire 8 conference tournament before most other conference tournaments even get started.
Yeah, I was tracking those results as I updated my sheet, and that's what you love to see this time of year is when you get a conference that's just absolute craziness. I think we've had some American Rivers seasons where it's like a 5-6 championship game where the 5 seed wins the whole thing. It looks like that's destined to happen in the Empire 8, so that's always fun to see.
All right, let's turn our heads to the east. What do you got there?
Zach, let's talk about Albright, who won a big game versus York, Pennsylvania on Saturday. That was 77-61. Albright then secured the number 2 seed in the MAC Commonwealth Tournament. Quite the tale of 2 halves of the season for Albright. They started 4-9 on the year, including dropping their first 2 conference games. Since then, they've gone on an absolute tear. They won 12 in a row to finish 12-2 in league play. And it really wasn't even just a case of they had their hard games early on and all their early games now. They had to play York. Like I just mentioned, they beat them. They played them twice. They were a top half of that league team. They had a tough road game at Hood that they won. Albright's looking legitimately good and tough now after spending kind of November and December as a D3 Hoops afterthought, sort of. They now really represent a really strong number 2 seed in that MAC Commonwealth tournament. That's going to be a fun one. Interesting dynamic there with how hot they are. But, Hood's been the top 25 team for most of the year. We'll have to see if Albright can really make some noise in that tournament.
Yeah, more to say on the MAC Commonwealth a little bit later. So I'm just going to jump into my play here in the East and talk about the United East tournament, another one of those early starting conference tournaments. That was the place to be for big upsets a year ago. As you may recall, the 12th seeded Penn College made a run to the semifinals before losing in overtime against top seeded Bryn Athyn. As I was getting caught up on the day's action Saturday night, I saw that maybe some UEC tournament magic could be in play once again. After winning the 7-10 matchup, 10th seeded Keystone was right there with 2nd seeded Penn State Brandywine late into the game Saturday night, but alas, seeding held in that 69-63 final. And for a conference that, I feel like we routinely see some chaos in, the top 4 seeds are all advancing to the semifinals there.
Yeah, it's been a fun tournament. They're the only tournament I think that has 10 teams making the conference tournament there. So a big tournament. They're early to get started. So I've definitely been tracking the UEC as well.
All right, kick us off in the South, Matt.
Yeah, St. Thomas, Texas defeated Centenary 75-63 on Sunday afternoon to finish the perfect 16-0 season in SCIAC conference play. St. Thomas had long ago locked up their NCAA tournament berth, but now they seem assured of a top 8 protected seed as well. I think they've not only set themselves up to host that first weekend pod, but I think if they can win in advance, they'll be hosting one of those standalone Sweet 16 games as well. Zach, we know that Region 10 doesn't get those second weekend hosting opportunities all that well, but we could see action down in Houston in the second weekend of the national tournament. Again, they've got to win the games to actually get there, but a great season so far for St. Thomas, Texas, and they've set themselves up well for those hosting rights if things work out in the national tournament.
Yeah, and that's one of those trickle-down effects of the combined championship with that standalone Sweet 16 weekend. Hey, if St. Thomas is there, you're only talking about needing to link up 2 teams. If they're the highest seeding team, instead of flying them somewhere, someone else gets flown to them, right? It's one flight either way. So it makes them gives them an easy opportunity there to get a second weekend host in Region 10. So that's going to be fun to see. But like you said, got to take care of business first. Mary Hardin-Baylor is a team that's caught our eye on a couple occasions this season, Matt. But let's talk Mary Hardin-Baylor women here. On Saturday, they missed their first 3-point shot, but went on to make their next 14 to race out to a 47-21 lead less than halfway through the second quarter against Howard Payne. And in starting the game 14 of 15 from 3-point range, that's an effective field goal percentage of 140%. Matt, we love effective field goal percentage, don't we? Jack Phelps tweeted that he attempted to do a deep dive just to see where that kind of streak from 3-point range ranks. And per his tweet, he believes that it set an all division record for either men or women. And then True to the Crew Twitter account followed that up with a tweet stating that 14 consecutive 3-point make streak broke the previous D3 record of 10 set in 1988. Matt, if a team is going to hit like 14 straight threes, I think you just got to say you're not winning that day, right?
I mean, you're not even going to expect Steph Curry to make 14 straight threes, let alone like an entire team in Division 3. So that's just super impressive. That's an amazing stat. And they crushed the record. That wasn't even close. If the previous record was 10 and they got 14, that's just simply amazing. That's awesome.
All right, let's finish up with the West.
Zach, Redlands led almost the entire way versus Whittier on their season finale on Saturday night. The Poets kept it close within a possession or two, even in the last several minutes, but in the end, it was Redlands who was able to close it out for the 86-82 win, and that allowed Redlands to draw back to even with Claremont Mudscripts at 13-3 to finish up SCIAC play. The Redlands Bulldogs swept the Stags in the regular season series, so that means Redlands will get the number 1 seed in that 5-team SCIAC tournament. This should will prove to be the final tournament played next Sunday, the championship game next Sunday. And if it is these 2 teams, Redlands and CMS, then most of the drama will be gone as they're both assured of NCAA tournament spots. The winner, though, might be in line to host a first weekend pod if the final NPI numbers shake out and the National Committee decides to put a first weekend pod there in Southern California. Also, possibly another scenario where we could see Region 10 hosting in the second weekend as well. But for Redlands, They needed that every possession on the final day to claim that 13-3 SCIAC championship. That's going to be a fantastic tournament. Although what we've seen in previous years is in the SCIAC, the favorites don't always play out. So we're expecting the CMS Redlands championship game. We'll have to see if we actually get there.
Yeah, I feel like it's a theme we've talked a lot about where, those have been over the course of the entire league play, the top 2 teams, but we've seen Chapman, we've seen Occidental be able to mount some sort of challenge.
Yeah.
So, hey, depending on what happens in like a one-game semifinal, it's no given that we're going to get a Redlands CMS final.
Yeah.
Even though we may expect it, I think it's very clear that the possibility exists that one or both of those teams gets upset along the way. We've seen that potential from the rest of the conference there. All right, I'll wrap us up here with MSOE. They showed some great closing speed in the Northern Athletics Collegiate Conference race with wins this past week over St. Norbert and Aurora, who were also, title contenders, top of the standings there. Those 2 wins allowed the Raiders to claim co-championship with St. Norbert at 16-2, one game better than Aurora's 15-3, another one of those wins MSOE had last week. So it was a difficult close to the conference schedule for MSOE, but set up a big opportunity that they capitalized on. And not only that, not only did they claim a co-championship, but they'll head into the NACC tournament as the number 1 seed.
Yeah, really good stuff from them. It had seemed like MSOE was a team that we had heard about in the preseason as a team to watch in the NACC, and they'd been good all season long, but it was that Aurora, those St. Norberts that were on top of the league. But then here this final week, MSOE gets those big wins and actually does claim that number 1 seed. I think they were even with maybe St. Norbert in the standings, but they claimed the number 1 seed. So the Raiders, we'll see if they can come out of the Northern Athletics Conference.
The Raiders. All right, that wraps up this week's 4-point play. Let's take a look at what you've got going into the fine folks at d3hoops.com for your ballot for this week's top 25.
Yeah, Zach, this is going to be the ballot that I have not yet submitted, but will likely soon submit here. Again, I had another conversation with myself for who was going to be number 1 at the top. Trinity had actually a really close quarterfinal NESCAC tournament game. Was that Bowdoin I think they played?
I believe it was Bowdoin.
Only a one-possession game. They did win. I kind of feel like heading now into the national tournament, I've been with Trinity, Connecticut all year long. Why change now? As I've mentioned in previous weeks, those top 2 or 3, 4, or actually 4 teams, basically even in my book. I didn't see a big reason to make a change right now. I'm just going to roll with that here. I'm going to go Trinity number 1, Chicago number 2, Randolph-Macon number 3, and Emory number 4.
We talk about it at the top. I feel like at this point, you're either going to be kind of second guessing and chasing yourself, or you just got to, stake your claim with someone and leave them there, right?
Yeah, and that's like once I decided myself that they're all even and they haven't done too much to change those positions, I'm just going to kind of roll with this for now. We'll see how conference tournaments shake out. Well, I guess Chicago and Emory don't have those, but for Macon and Trinity, and then how the final stretch in the UAA goes, may shift, next week going into the national tournament, but we'll see.
Let's talk about the team you have rounding out your top 10, Montclair State. Of course, they were the number 1 in last week's D3Hoops.com top 25 poll as the lone remaining unbeaten, but they suffered their first loss of the season. You were not one of their number 1 voters, as you mentioned, sticking with Trinity through thick and thin here. I believe you had them 7, correct me if I'm wrong, last week, right? But moving them from 7 to 10 is not as drastic as, maybe someone who did have them number 1, moving them all the way down there. But Montclair State, maybe you're not the right person to ask because you did have them still down at 7 last week. But what do you think about Montclair State now that they have suffered that first loss, kind of losing that gold chip in some people's minds that, being the lone undefeated gives them?
I mean, all season long, I kind of expected them to lose one of those NJAC games. And TCNJ is a really good team in their own right, and they got beat. And I didn't want to really overreact to that too much. I still think that they're probably a top 10 team. I wasn't too high on them when they were kind of the lone unbeaten left, and people were having them up. To me, they were never really in that Trinity, Chicago, Randolph-Macon class. I had them in the next group, kind of that 8, 9, 10 range. And even with the loss, I kind of still see them right there. So for me, with that loss, Montclair State didn't really change that much in my eyes.
Let's talk about the UW schools, because that's kind of been a mess to try to figure out. Lacrosse seems to have really gotten hot over the last half of the conference season, maybe. Stevens Point, a little bit up and down. Whitewater, of course, kind of claimed that regular season championship. So, definitely some consistency there to be able to do that with kind of the carnage we've seen between the top 5, certainly. Talk about how your approach in putting Lacrosse 17, Whitewater 21, and Stevens Point 22.
Yeah, I think lacrosse had some staying power for most of the year in my top 25. Whitewater has had some really hot weeks here recently and gotten themselves back into this mix. Actually, I don't know that I've actually voted them. I probably had earlier in the year. I can't remember right now off the top of my head. And then Stevens Point had been in that group. I think to me, down the stretch in WAC play, Oshkosh had kind of fallen out of this group. Platteville had maybe fallen out of this group, although, they're not too far behind in terms of actual team quality. I kind of felt like, two or three UW schools deserved it in this point. And as I've been saying, with the top five being kind of tied, these last 15 or so are also kind of tied in my book. So there's not a whole lot of separation here going from UW lacrosse down through Stevens Point from 17 to 22.
And let's maybe just finish it off. 23, Maryville, Tennessee. 24, Roanoke. 25, WPI. It feels like there's always so many options that voters
Yeah.
have for those last few spots. Talk about the decision to give, maybe those three the last, and some of the other ones that you were kind of considering to name on that ballot.
Yeah. So a team like Maryville, I think this is maybe now the second or third week I've had them back in my top 25. They've looked strong. I know they haven't had a lot of opportunities in CCS play to put up like top quality wins, but for me, I'm even reaching back into November and how they played Carthage at the Great Lakes Invitational. And I had been considering some of these last few weeks voting for Carthage, but before I did that, I felt like I had to vote Maryville because I saw them beat Carthage in person rather convincingly. And Maryville's gone through their conference play as expected and won games. Then Roanoke at 24, they're a team for me. The computers have always liked. They're very competitive with other good teams. They haven't always won those games. So I can see voters being a little bit skeptical. I'm a little bit skeptical at times of Roanoke this year, but they're a team that I do like. I know that they can beat anyone. Will they always do that? I'm not sure, but I think at this point, with a lot of teams have taken losses, have scars on the resume, I felt like Roanoke could come back in at the bottom of my ballot. And WPI, I think, continues to put together a great season in a tough conference in the NUMAC. It looks like, I think they're the number one seed. Babson's the number two seed there. That's going to be a crazy conference. Who knows if they'll win it? But I think WPI is in that mix there at 25 as well.
That's going to be a lot of fun to watch play out. And then I think we do get another top 25 heading into the tournament, right? But I think it's
so.
the one that no one really cares about because we've got this whole tournament to kind of figure this stuff out, right after it comes out.
It's the one that's always now held in place then for 3 weeks as we go through the tournament. And there's usually some top team that gets knocked out early and you got to keep looking at them as like number 6, but they're out. They're not even in the Sweet 16. Or someone who's unranked and they're like in the Elite 8, right? This is a year that could almost certainly happen. Someone not in the top 25 that we see in Fort Wayne. I would almost bet on that happening.
All right, so let's talk about some of these conference races as they move into conference tournament time. We got a selection here. We're not going to talk about every conference necessarily, but some that really we thought were interesting, and maybe that's setting up a bid thief situation. Maybe it's looking like a really competitive, conference race, one to keep an eye on, that sort of thing. So we got a pretty large selection here. So let's talk about it. Kicking off with the American Rivers Conference, which really has been one of those very competitive leagues. We've seen it be a 4-bid league. We've seen it be a 1-bid league, but it seems like the one thing you can count on is that there's always, no matter, where that top group is or that top team is, there's going to be a collection of teams that's kind of right around that same level. And that's the case again here heading into the American Rivers Conference tournament.
Yeah, and the screenshots that you clipped for us here, Zach, are the NPIs for the conference through Sunday night. And what's interesting here in the American Rivers is Co is the NPI leader, but I think they're the 3 seed in the conference tournament. I think Nebraska Wesleyan is 1, Loras is 2, Co's 3. But as you mentioned, bunch of even teams. Almost anyone could win that, especially out of that top 4 group. I don't think we'd be really surprised whoever came out of that one. And then Wartburg and Buena Vista, I think, round out the tournament there.
But it's a big prize at stake, right? Because this is looking like this is going to be 1 bid.
Yeah, almost
and
certainly.
there's really 4 contenders. So going to be a big difference between winning that final and losing that final. But like you said, there's probably 4 teams here, certainly that look like strong contenders. So American Rivers seems like it's always a conference tournament to keep an eye on just because it's always so competitive.
Yeah.
This year, no different. Next one here, Matt, we're going to talk about is the Centennial Conference. Another interesting one, like you mentioned with previously with the NPI leader not being the conference leader necessarily. This is another one where Gettysburg is going to be the top seed in the Centennial Conference, but they probably need to win the conference tournament to get into the NCAA tournament, whereas Franklin and Marshall and Johns Hopkins maybe have some additional hopes of an at-large bid.
Yeah, and Franklin and Marshall, I think, is the 4 seed here. I think Ursinus actually
They
claimed the
are.
3 seed. So yeah,
That's
that's a big
correct.
spot. And you're right with Gettysburg. I think no hope of an at large. They need to win that AQ. Whereas Hopkins and FNM, especially if they get into that final, I think that they have a really good shot at making as at large. So really interesting dynamic there. Another conference though that at the top is very even. I think that's going to be one of our themes here. Almost anyone can win, and these teams have all seen each other multiple times, if not this year, because I think the Centennial maybe doesn't play a full double round robin right now, but they've seen each other. They're familiar with the programs. So that just makes these conference tournaments that more intense.
Mhm. And I believe the Centennial works where the top seed gets the lowest remaining seed, right? So even
Okay,
if
yeah.
chalk holds, with Franklin and Marshall being the 4 seed, that's who Gettysburg will draw, where the 2 and 3 seed would be playing in the semifinals. So it's kind of an interesting position for Gettysburg as the top seed, where they stand in NPI, how that kind of would all work out. Let's move on to the CCIW, which for a while there, as we kind of expected, trending towards a multi-bid league. Illinois Wesleyan has remained looking very strong at the top. Carthage and Elmhurst, however, both took losses this
Yeah.
past week, which is really going to hurt them. It's now looking to me, Matt. You'll have to see if you agree. It's not looking to me that the most likely path to the CCIW being a multi-bid league is for someone other than Illinois Wesleyan to win the conference championship. Right, the at-large chances seem to have really dwindled out of the CCIW. Illinois Wesleyan is a stone cold lock. They are going to
Yeah.
be in the tournament no matter what happens. So for the CCIW to be um, a multi-bid league, like this is trending towards the CCIW being one of those like bid thief situations.
I mean, I think that's the easy and obvious path for two bids there because you're right. Illinois Wesleyan is locked up. I think Carthage does have a pretty strong path of making the conference final. Let's say that there's a Carthage Elmhurst semifinal matchup. The winner of that might feel okay. I don't know if the Elmhurst is really going to be feeling okay. If it's Carthage, if it's a Carthage versus Illinois Wesleyan final, you might be trending towards really good chances of two bids at that point. But yeah, you're right. Definitely, if someone beats Illinois Wesleyan in that tournament, then we're getting two out of the CCIW for sure.
Let's go to the CNE, the Conference of New England. This is for sure going to be a bid thief conference to watch with Endicott there, another one of those teams currently number 10 overall in NPI through play on Sunday, February 22nd. They're in the top 10 there. I mean, they're going to be wanting to win the conference tournament to keep a hold on a top 16 spot, maybe contend for a top 8 spot. But they're going to be in the tournament either way. Behind them, not any teams that we're seeing going to have an at-large chance. So if anyone other than Endicott were to win the CNE conference tournament here, that would definitely be a bid thief and would burst someone's bubble.
Yeah, Zach, but this is the time of year when teams from this conference, whether it's the CNE or the Triple C as it was previously, they just like turn it up 2 notches. All of a sudden, teams that looked like better than middling in Division Three, above average, but not really in that top 25 mix. Someone just goes on an absolute run here. We've seen that Elite Eight type run from Nichols. We've seen Western New England make a Sweet 16. We think it's going to be Endicott this year, but even though how good they've been in that conference, it's still a deep enough, good enough league that someone could upset them. There's just always craziness out of these groups of teams. I don't know what it is about late February into March, but CNE teams really like to turn it up. I'm really interested in watching how this tournament develops and then what those team or teams do in the national tournament. But you're right, it's only Endicott or it's a bid thief.
Well, and even Endicott being the class of the CNE here, they've avoided taking that loss
Mm-hmm.
over the last few weeks, but there's been certainly some final scores, some late
Yeah,
game situations that they've looked very
pretty
vulnerable.
tight.
Just one of those to turn into a loss here, conference tournament time, right? That's going to have a big
Yeah.
impact. Not to the point where it's going to keep Endicott out, but it's going to keep somebody out because was going to be a one bid league if Endicott
Yeah.
wins it. So for the CNE to then turn into a two bid league, that's gonna be cost someone's spot somewhere. Next up, going to stay in the same kind of geographic area with the GNAC, the Great Northeast Athletic Conference. this is also looking like a one bid league, Matt. But I thought this one was really interesting because there's a whole group of teams here. Well, really the top three, whether you're talking St. Joseph, Connecticut, St. Joseph's, Maine, and Albertus
Yeah.
Magnus. I think I could see any of the three winning the conference tournament here. But what really stuck out to me is that this is a group of teams that are efficiency ratings like a lot better than how they are ranked in NPI. So, surely a one bid league, but there's a few options here that I think, regardless of who it is, could be a team that gives a first round opponent a lot of trouble and maybe feel a little bit like an underseeded team according to NPI heading into the tournament. Wonder what you thought about that.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think St. Joseph, Connecticut was a team I had recently pulled into the top 25 of my ballot. I took them back out because they lost to St. Joseph's, Maine. Efficiency ratings like Albertus Magnus as like a top 30-ish type team. I think that they're a team that's been in that mode. Not always tested as much through GNAC play as some other conferences, but it could be a really interesting dynamic at play if, let's just say, we just mentioned the CNE. What if Endicott hosts a pod and pulls the GNAC champion? That could be one of those. It could be St. Joseph, Connecticut. Could be St. Joseph's, Maine. That's a really tough out for a host to get. So if you're a host up in that Northeast and you pull the GNAC champion in the first round, that could be tough. That could be tough for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, whether you're talking about seated as like one of those best number fours in a pod or like a low three in a pod playing a two
Yeah.
seed, that seems like it could be a really tricky spot for whoever that pod two or pod one would be,
Yeah.
no matter who's coming out of the GNAC.
And the committee would have to seed by NPI, so it would be fairly
Right.
seeded, but it would make,
Correct.
even if they were like the third best team in a pod, that would still make that pod heavier talent wise than you would normally expect, just because the NPIs don't really match up with the skill level in this case, just based on the records, right? It's
Yeah.
NPIs doing its job and efficiency ratings are doing its job. It's just one of these cases where they don't, always line up in the way you might expect.
So file that one. That's going to be one to keep our eye on when we get to the tournament time. We've got our bracket. We're doing our first round picks and preview based on our computer efficiency ratings. Just file that because that'll be an interesting one to watch. That might, you know, I'm guessing that's going to be one that we look at what what the computer line is, and that's going to be looking like a pretty competitive game. All right, let's move on to the landmark conference here, where Catholic is looking strong. Scranton and Drew maybe still have work to do to really play themselves onto the bubble. So, Matt, I don't know how you really want to categorize this one. Catholic, I think, is in great
Yeah.
position. Landmark, maybe a little bit like the CCIW, where this is looking kind of bid thiefy. There's that obvious multi-bid path with the leader, in this case Catholic, not winning the conference tournament. A couple teams that are maybe on the fringe of kind of bubble status.
Yeah, well, Catholic beating Scranton this past weekend definitely solidified them. If they weren't already solid into the national tournament, they're in. Scranton and Drew have still both been showing themselves to be alive in our bubble watch picture, but on the wrong side of the bubble. So they definitely have work to do. For either of them, getting to the landmark final, I think, is a definite criteria as a starting point for that at-large discussion. I think the only thing, I mean, it's kind of a technicality, but the only thing that would maybe prevent this from being a pure bid thief is, let's say Scranton does go in and wins this tournament. Would Scranton then play themselves in above the at-large number 21 NPI, so that maybe not technically a bid thief, but wouldn't have been in had they lost the last one. So depending on how you want to define that, maybe they would have been in that range. Not quite sure, but one bid for sure. If you're Scranton or Drew, you just got to go into this tournament with the mindset of, we need to win it. We need the AQ, because even if you lose in that final, that at-large might not be there for you.
Yeah, it was a particularly bad week for Scranton's bubble chances. Not only the loss to Catholic you mentioned, but earlier in the week dropping a game to Wilkes, right?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of week that you cannot have
Yeah.
when you're really trying to fight for that spot on the bubble.
That puts you from 70% to 30% or whatever. I don't know the exact numbers, but something like that, right?
Okay, next up is the Little East, another sure one bid league, Matt, but it's another one that's got four or five teams that look really competitive. Another um, group of teams that are pretty closely packed, and by the time you get down from one all the way down to maybe five or six, pretty evenly packed in the NPI here. Um, I mean, this is one that we've talked about. We've kind of seen this dynamic come in. It was going to be a really competitive Little East Conference tournament, and now we're finally here. We get to see it play out.
Yeah, and this is going to be one. I believe this is a six-team tournament, but that quarterfinal, the kind of 3-6, 4-5 games are going to be really entertaining as well. It almost feels like you said 5 or 6 even teams. You could stack this tournament up almost any way, and I think you could get any result out of it, right? Western Connecticut's the number one seed. They're not a lock to win it. I think they have a really good shot at it, but they're not a lock to win it. UMass Boston's had a great year. I think that they're the number 2 seed. Again, there's going to be I was going to say there could be plenty of upsets in this conference tournament bracket, but I don't know that any of these games are actually upsets. That's just what makes it really fun. I think the Little East is going to be a fun one to watch, whether you're actually tuning into the broadcast or just scoreboard watching. Probably just the one bid league, so that takes out some of the drama, but will be really entertaining nonetheless.
Well, in some ways it takes out the drama, but in other ways it increases the drama, right? That all that's at stake. It all
Yeah.
comes down to who wins that game, right? There's no consolation prize at play here.
Yeah. Sometimes when a heavy favorite loses, you wonder, like, did they just not care as much, right? Because they knew that they were in. That's not the case for any of these teams. They all are playing to continue their seasons, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, in the case of the Little East, you look at all these teams, and part of the issue is there's just not that much difference between number one and number 6. Okay, we you mentioned the Matt Commonwealth with Albright and the big win they had over Hood. So let's talk about the Matt Commonwealth because there are definitely some teams like Albright trending in the right direction, but from an NCAA tournament standpoint, there's Hood looking like a lock, and the rest trying to um, claim someone else's bid, turn the Matt Commonwealth into a 2-bid league uh, by way of making the conference a bid thief
Yeah.
conference.
Yeah. And Albright beating York in the last, I think they beat him twice, maybe in the last 3 weeks, something like that. But that maybe turned York. If those two results had flipped and York had won both of those games, we might be talking about this as being a 2-bid league. York had been kind of looking strong on the bubble before that, but they had taken some of those losses at the hands of Albright in particular to kind of knock themselves off. Maybe York is still in the mix. Not quite sure if they could get to a final. But yeah, if you're not Hood, you probably really just need to go in here thinking about winning the AQ. But interesting dynamic there because we've seen those teams kind of beat each other or have the ability to do that. So 3-team race here, even though one is the only one assured of the tournament spot.
It seems like the specific dynamics of the Matt Commonwealth are different almost every year, but you can always count on the Matt
Yeah.
Commonwealth to have something interesting at
Yeah.
play.
Whether it's Eastern or Widener in previous years, they're now a little bit lower in the standings this year. Hood,
Right.
the last few years, been Hood as well, but York and then Albright making this run. A fascinating league every year. You're right; it's churned the names, but it's still kind of a similar dynamic.
All right, let's move on to the MIAA, another one that we've talked about in recent weeks. Heading into conference tournament play there, the top 4 look just as even today as they did a week ago. You've got the nice triad with Calvin sweeping Hope, who swept Olivet, who swept Calvin. So I don't know. It's a game of rock paper scissors. Throw Trine in there, who has also been very competitive with that group, and you got 4 teams that could win it, and we wouldn't be surprised by any of the 4.
Yeah, and you see the NPI order here for those top 4. It's almost the inverse of what's actually happening. Olivet got the 1 seed, Hope is the 2 seed, Calvin is the 3 seed, and Trine is the 4 seed. But NPI again almost likes them in reverse, and our efficiency ratings have almost liked them in reverse of that. I think the efficiency ratings match up fairly well to these NPI numbers as far as those teams order. If those 4 make it to the semifinals of the MIAA, being played at whatever it is, 1,000-seat Olivet, it could be really, really entertaining games Friday night. So I'm hoping to be there and see some of those.
All right, from the MIAA to the MIAC, the MIAC, Matt, out in Minnesota. This is another bid thief potential conference with Gustavus Adolphus. They've been very solid all season, but the only surefire bid out of the MIAC. If they don't win it, that sends someone else into the tournament, making the MIAC a 2-bid league and popping the bubble of someone else
Yeah.
because there isn't anyone else who's going to be in play for an at-large bid.
Yeah. And Gustavus did take that one loss, I think just one in-conference play. But they're another team that hasn't always won by huge margins. There was a game I was watching, I think a game at Concordia Moorhead. I believe that one went into overtime. It was tight nonetheless down the stretch. So I think they could be vulnerable in the MIAC tournament. They're certainly a heavy favorite, but you could see them get upset, and that would turn this into a two bid league, which would knock someone else off the bubble.
Well, a couple weeks ago, it was the taking a loss to Carleton,
Yeah,
who was their nemesis last year, and keeping
exactly.
them out of the tournament with two late season losses that saw their bubble burst. Really, without either one of those losses to Carleton, Gustavus
Yeah,
Adolphus is probably in the tournament a year ago.
yeah. And
So
and they're in
we'll see
this
if they
year,
get.
so they're good.
Yeah,
They're
they're
in
good
this
this year.
year.
So even if they trip up, they don't necessarily have to worry about that. But just interesting. This last loss was Carleton, given the history of how
Yeah.
a couple losses to Carleton figured into their tournament outlook a year ago. Rolling on here, it's another one we've talked about a bunch. The NCAC. Denison did claim the number one seed there, but it's still going to be a wide open tournament. You can see where all those teams rank in the NPI rankings through play on February 22nd, 42, 50, 54. And then you got a little bit of a break between Wittenberg and Wabash, but that's really been a close group
Yeah.
between all five of them, really, through much of the conference season.
And it's probably a case of the conference beating up on each other, costing, quote unquote, costing them an at-large bid somewhere. If a team like John Carroll or any one of these teams, had won a couple of extra games, they would probably be sitting pretty for inclusion into the tournament should they not win. I think it's probably a one bid league. I think John Carroll specifically is maybe on somewhat of a life support system for a at large chance, but really NCAC, as good as all these teams are, I think John Carroll, DePauw, Denison, Wabash, Wittenberg. We've seen them play with almost anyone in the country, and I think they could all be types of teams that could make noise in the national tournament. Probably just one bid though, so only going to be one shot at doing that in the national tournament.
John Carroll also having to play a quarterfinal game as the 3 seed there. DePauw will be the 2 seed. So John Carroll draws Oberlin in the first round, playing a quarterfinal before taking on a potential semifinal. So a little bit of an increased opportunity maybe for
Yeah,
John Carroll to kind of like pad that bubble resume, but also leaves them maybe a little bit more at risk having to play that additional game. That's going to be a little bit of a dynamic. I think we'll have some other opportunities to talk about here with just kind of the path that team's taking and how that could maybe shape their ultimate bubble outlook. All right, let's move on for now to the NJAC, Matt, where um, again, another one of those, maybe there's a path for
yeah,
TCNJ to get an at-large bid. Montclair State certainly going to be safe. So this, could be could be a one bid league, could be a two bid league, most likely if most likely path to that is someone other than Montclair State to win the NJAC tournament. But also, it looks like there's still potentially a path for TCNJ to get there with maybe a loss to Montclair State
right.
in the final.
Yeah. And now, though we've seen that Montclair State is not invulnerable in this conference, TCNJ just knocked them off recently. Will be interesting to see if that is another matchup in this conference tournament that we see as well. That would be a heck of a final, especially if we knew when's their final is that Saturday or they play before. Nonetheless, we might know kind of by the time TCNJ gets there, do they have an at-large chance or not? That could add an interesting extra dynamic into a potential, we don't know for sure, but a potential Montclair State TCNJ final.
It feels very different this year going into conference championship week than it typically does, right? I mean, just to think maybe there's a second bid for the
Yeah,
NJAC that's
right,
been pretty comfortably a multi-bid league
right.
for a number of years now. All right, another conference that's been comfortably a multi-bid league for now for quite a while that we'll just have to see how it shakes out here, and that's the ODAC. Randolph-Macon, one of those teams very near the top that is a lock at this point, but a couple of teams hovering more around where that at-large cut line will be with Virginia Wesleyan and Roanoke. I think there's maybe a path where the ODAC is just a one bid league
Yeah,
this year. Maybe there's still paths where they're a three bid league. A lot to get shaken out there in the ODAC with, maybe not quite the potential we see in a typical year of a team to really stack together some really meaningful wins, right? We
yeah,
saw last year with Guilford making that run through the ODAC tournament where they, by the time I think they got to that final, they were a lock when they entered the conference tournament with, pretty small chance of playing their way in, but they were just able to stack up those wins. I don't know that possibility is there because you don't see just as many ODAC teams. Look at the current NPI rankings. Only Randolph-Macon in that top 30 right now. So a little bit of a different dynamic with the ODAC. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does look to us as we record here on Sunday night that both Virginia Wesleyan and Roanoke maybe do have a path to losing an ODAC final and getting into the national tournament. Not for sure. We'll have to see how the landscape kind of continues to shape itself out. But really, no one else does. The thing the ODAC does have advantageous for it, and that will help both Virginia Wesleyan and Roanoke, is it's a full 8-team tournament, and there's enough depth in this league that even like a 2-7 game, I think, will help your NPI in the ODAC. A lot of leagues, that's just a game that's going to be dropped from the NPI, right? It's not going to be helping you that much. But I think a 2-7 would help you here, or at least not hurt you. And then let's say we do get a Virginia Wesleyan Roanoke semifinal matchup. I think at that point you'd be talking about the loser almost being certainly out. I should be careful about saying certainly. And then the winner look good. I think that would be our path to 2 ODACs. To say nothing of like a bid thief situation, Randolph-Macon losing in like a quarterfinal or something like that crazy. But I think right now it's looking like Virginia Wesleyan or Roanoke. It's probably not an and. It's maybe one or the other, maybe not both.
Next up, President's Athletic Conference. Another one bid league, Matt, but another one where there's 5, maybe 6 teams that have a legitimate chance to win it. Even if you go down the list 6 deep here on the current NPI standings for the conference, you see Grove City at 254, but they're a team that our computer efficiency ratings see as a much better team, much closer to Westminster, PA, than they do look in the NPI standings. So 5, maybe 6 teams that have a pretty good shot, or at least some sort of realistic chance to win the thing. With Washington and Jefferson, being the number 1 seed, being kind of the team for most of the year. I think most people have thought about as the leader there in the PAC.
And I think they did like a north-south split this year and seeded the tournament. The one north and the one south as being the top 2 seeds. And I think that was Westminster and Washington and Jefferson actually that claimed those top seeds. But the dynamic in the PAC all season long has been kind of teams beating each other or having the ability to beat each other. So it's just going to be a really interesting conference tournament because of that dynamic of the evenness and quality at the top. And now it's not like national elite quality, but it's very good quality. And it's the type of teams, if it is like a W&J, we've seen them at events like the Great Lakes Invitational compete with other kind of top 25 caliber teams.
Yeah, play very well that weekend.
Will be interesting to see who comes out of this. I think you're right. Unfortunately, probably just one team will come out of this into the national tournament, but will be an interesting one nonetheless.
The next conference is another potential bid thief conference, and that's the SAA, with Trinity, Texas being in good shape there. And Rhodes having lost to Center a couple of weeks ago, that really took a hit to their at-large chances. Trinity's looking good, but they've also lost twice to Rhodes already. So that conference championship is no sure thing.
Yeah. And to me, that's the really, really interesting dynamic here in the SAA is it's Trinity that looks like the tournament lock for the national tournament.
Yeah.
But they tied Rhodes in the win-loss columns for the SAA, but they're going to be the number 2 seed because Rhodes beat them twice. So what by seeding would be an upset if Trinity beats Rhodes is not the upset, right? But I think that's Rhodes' only path. I think they're going to have to go and win this conference tournament to get in. Maybe they're a life support type at-large team where if everything breaks their way and they lost the final, then maybe they could get in. But again, one of these teams where you're sitting in NPI right now, you got to go in with the mindset of winning the whole thing and not counting on any sort of at-large being there for you.
Yep. Looks like the SAA will be Trinity or Trinity and someone other than Trinity that won the conference tournament. All right, another kind of so this will be interesting to talk about, Matt. The SCIAC here, St. Thomas, Texas, another one of those Texas schools there that's a tournament lock. Concordia, Texas, hanging around there, and we've seen some good things from Concordia, Texas. Maybe there's I think certainly a threat then maybe to keep St. Thomas from running away with a conference tournament championship. Whether or not they can make a run that's enough to be bubbly to keep, maybe them taking down St. Thomas from being a true bid thief situation? Not quite sure.
Yeah, they're a team that in our bubble watch has on D3Datacast.com has hung around the bubble. We'll have to see if that continues to develop here as conference tournament weeks around the country play out. Again, probably want to have the mindset of winning the SCIAC title to for sure get in, but there is maybe a path where Concordia, Texas, if say they lost a final to St. Thomas, Texas, maybe their NPI value does stay above a cut line. Those are probably in scenarios where there are few bid thieves. The computers so far have been trending toward lower bid thief numbers, maybe only 2 on average. But we have seen some simulations where it's been as high as maybe 7 or even 8. And that would spell the end for Concordia, Texas, I'm pretty sure. So, again, if you're not one of these teams that are a lock, you really, really need to have the mindset of winning that tournament. And if the at-large is there for you, then that's a nice surprise, but probably not counting on it at this point.
Let's talk about the Skyline. That is another one where there is a path potentially that could potentially see the Skyline be a multi-bid conference. Yeshiva will be the number one seed in that conference tournament, but it's Farmingdale State that enters the conference tournament with some at-large chances to play for, Matt. And this is where I think maybe we can expand the discussion a little bit more, because the Skyline is not one of those places that you think of being where you can really bolster your at-large resume, um, right? So Farmingdale State what kind of enters play in the conference tournament as we look at the numbers through play on February 22nd, just outside of that kind of projected cut line area. Um, but I know as you sent me a message earlier today, kind of maybe shedding some light on how there's maybe a little bit more opportunity for a team like Farmingdale State because this is a full 8-team tournament. Uh, to add a little bit more than you would typically think is possible when you're playing other Skyline opponents.
Yeah, if you're going to be an at-large team outside of the UAA, that means you suffered a loss in your conference tournament. So you have an additional loss somewhere coming. That being the case, you would almost rather, it depends on the situation, obviously, but almost rather be a team that plays in an 8-team conference tournament where you get to go 2-1 in conference championship week rather than in a 6-team where maybe the 1 or 2 seed get a bye and you go 1-1. If in this case, the way the numbers we're looking at the NCAA's NPI release on Sunday, Farmingdale would match up with St. Joe's Long Island in their first round game. That game was still going to give a win value, I think, around 61, which is usually where around the at-large cut line is. It's kind of right around where Farmingdale State's NPI is right now. So that's not a game that's going to hurt them. If anything, is going to maybe pull them up slightly if they can win that game. But what it also does is helps stabilize you against a loss. So again, if we're assuming Farmingdale State is an at-large candidate, maybe they win 2 games and maybe they lose a final to Yeshiva. If they can even win 2 of those kind of 61 type NPI games and then take a loss to even a decent team like Yeshiva, going 2-1 is not going to drag you down as much as going 1-1. Even if the one win was against a slightly better team, like going to the NCAC, if you beat DePaul and then lost to Denison, that would still be worse in your NPI than probably going 2-1 against the Skyline tournament schedule, once we're at this point in the season. So I'm not saying that every conference should go out and do 8 teams or anything like that. I'm just saying that there's certain scenarios in which this might be playing into Farmingdale's favor. If this was a 6-team tournament right now and they were the 2 seed, that might alone kind of kill their chances of being at large, because that 1-1 from here on out would bring their NPI down enough, whereas the 2-1 just maybe keeps it right at or above where that cut line could end up being.
And it's an interesting kind of change up from some of the dynamics we saw at play under the old system, where you really wanted to get your number 1 or number 2 seed away from having to play your number 7 or number 8 seed, because a lot of times those are games you win. They're not going to really, help your winning percentage a whole lot at that point in the season, but they could really do some damage to your SOS. But with this change to NPI, maybe it doesn't turn out to be a game that really helps you, but adding it onto your schedule, as long as you win it, isn't really going to hurt you either in the way that some of those games could have in the past. So I'm not sure that we'll see a trend back towards full tournaments or 8-team tournaments. But it is a little bit interesting if, to the extent that not tanking the SOS of some of your top seeds was motivation for moving away from fuller tournaments or towards, first round buys and 16 tournaments. That's kind of changed quite a bit, and so there's some interesting cases. The Skyline here with Farmingdale State being one where I think it's really it seems really to the benefit that they have still an 8-team tournament as opposed to something less or something that's set up to kind of protect those top seeds a little bit more. All right, one more to talk about here, and it's no surprise because it's one we've talked a lot about throughout the season, and that's the WIAC. It's going to be a big bid league. It just kind of remains to be seen whether it's going to be 4 bids, whether it's going to be 5 bids. And this is another one, Matt, where I think that maybe as things have kind of solidified a little bit, a team like Whitewater is going to be fine if they have that first round bid and they suffer that semifinal loss. They go 0-1 in the tournament. That's not going to be too bad. But for a team that does have to play a quarterfinal, getting that win in the quarterfinal before losing a semifinal, um, you know, is going to be kind of a preferable result, even though it's ultimately both a semifinal loss. So it kind of goes into the previous discussion with Farmingdale being able to put together potentially a 2-1 before suffering that loss, kind of picking up what is going to be a very good win in a quarterfinal WIAC game before maybe bowing out in a semifinal can really help as well.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing coming out of this is, will we get 5 WIAC teams into the tournament, or will we only get 4? I've been kind of thinking it's more likely that we only get 4. I think that WIAC quarterfinal loser any WIAC quarterfinal loser could be on the edge, but I think Platteville and Oshkosh are matched up. Especially if it's Oshkosh that loses that one. I think we're then almost pretty solidly into 4 WIAC territory. I don't know that Oshkosh can handle a quarterfinal loss very well and still expect to stay above the cut line. We'll see. I'm not sure that that's entirely dead, but that's the game to watch is how will that loser be, and especially if it's Oshkosh, since they're starting out lower, they probably won't be able to handle that very well. But I think certainly, yeah, Stevens Point, La Crosse, Whitewater looking very strong at this point, looking like probably all solidly in. I don't think that we have really any 3 WIAC scenarios really left at this point. You're just going to get enough wins, and there's enough quality in there already that you probably won't get teams to drop below. So we'll get a bunch of WIACs in. I think the only question is it 4 or is it 5?
Another interesting thing worth pointing out here, Matt, is Stout claimed the 6th seed, but
Yeah.
from an overall conference NPI standpoint, it would have been much preferable had Eau Claire claim the 6th seed there. Eau Claire is out of the tournament despite being currently ranked number 108 overall in NPI, whereas Stout is 202, right? So for who you're adding into your mix of wins and losses potentially, Eau Claire actually would have been much preferable compared to Stout, but that's not the way it played out. Just a really strange season for Eau Claire. They go 11-0 in non-conference. They hit WIAC play. Now, admittedly, I think we all knew going into
Yeah.
it was a fairly
Easy schedule.
soft non-conference schedule. Then they hit non-conference play, go 3-11 in WIAC play, don't make it into the conference tournament. But you still see the impact that 11-0 non-conference had on their overall NPI compared to Stout in claiming the 6th seed in that last spot, just because of the difference in the non-conference performance, almost 100 spots in NPI ranking.
Yeah, and you're right, Zach, to point that out, because had Eau Claire made it as the 6th team and then gone on to the conference tournament, that would have boosted whoever they beat, and then whoever beat them, right, that NPI number carries through. Now they'll have Stout, so that does limit the WIAC's total potential NPI a little bit more than it would have had Eau Claire been in there.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it doesn't impact the number of teams ultimately that get in from the WIAC, but when you're talking about those races for hosting rights, or I don't know,
Sure.
I don't know if there's a top 8 potential still on the board here, with teams kind of grouped between 15 and 21, looking at the top 3 from the WIAC and the NPI. But still, that's the kind of thing that I think that's a big enough difference in almost 100 spots in the NPI rankings, in potential 6 seed filtering into that WIAC tournament. So that's our list. Those are all the the snapshots of conferences that we're keeping an eye on. We're going to keep an eye on all of them, Matt, but those were some of them that we thought were particularly interesting and we think really will shape ultimately the tournament field that we get when it is released just a week from now.
Yeah, it's going to be a great week. It's going to be a great week.
All right. Should we move on to the picks?
Yeah, looking back at last week, Zach, or did you want to recap these? Do you want me to recap these?
Why don't you recap
I'll
them?
recap these. All right, Zach, our first game was St. Norbert and MSOE. That was a 2-point line in favor of St. Norbert, who was on the road, but MSOE covered that one. They won by 8. Zach, you got that point. Otterbein and Ohio Northern was our next game. This was a pick'em. Ohio Northern won this game by a point. We had both gone with Otterbein, so we both missed that pick. Next one in that WIAC that we just talked about, Whitewater and Stevens Point. This was a 4-point line in favor of Stevens Point. We both picked them to cover that, but Whitewater won by 10, and so we both missed the point. Out in the Liberty League, it was RPI and St. Lawrence. RPI were 2-point favorites on the road. We both picked them despite that, and they did prove us correct. They won by 8 points and got us both of those points. Our D3 Datacast game of the week out in the SCIAC. We discussed a little bit of this. Redlands beat Claremont Mudscripts handily. The line was only 2.5, but you picked Redlands. I picked Claremont Mudscripts, and I was very, very wrong on this, Zach. Another bad week for me, allowing you to catch up some. You went 3-2. I was just 1-4. You're 38-40-2, almost back to 500. I am 45-33-2, Zach. And with conference tournaments and national tournaments still ahead, I think I've given up enough points that you're kind of back in this mix here. So what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I can't keep a consistent enough string together, but I think we need to point out here, Matt, we had a guest picker last week.
Yep.
Right. And the guest picker went 2-3. So the final standings from last week's huge contest between the D3 Data Sibs was first place was age, second place was beauty, third place was
me.
Which way am I pointing? You.
I'm glad to be neither age nor beauty, so that's great for me. All right, Zach, let's take a look at this week's slate. So these are known conference tournament matchups. So we might get other future great games, but there's a 16 tournament. We don't even know who the 1s and 2s are playing yet. So we had to pick from known games. Again, we pick 5 games. We run them through our computer efficiency ratings. We get a expected point spread, and then we pick against that. Zach, we're going to NCAC first. Wabash and Wittenberg. Wabash are 3-point underdogs on the road. Your pick.
Yeah, I've been a little bit surprised with the way that Wittenberg has hung in the NCAC race, and maybe Wabash has faded a little bit here. But I'm going to take the points, and maybe I'm falling into a trap here on the road, but give me the Little Giants.
Okay, taking the points. All right, yeah. To me, these teams are pretty even, and I thought this line was a little bit more than home court advantage should go for. So that was my opinion as well. I went with Wabash in this one. I've been expecting tight things for all of these types of NCAC teams, so I think we'll see it again, but it should be a good one. Out in the CCIW, Carroll at Elmhurst. Elmhurst favored by 2 at home. Zach, your pick.
Well, we talked about it in the big conference tournament segment, right? This is really a must win for Elmhurst. Just a 2-point line at home. Give me the Blue Jays.
All right, Zach. Interesting pick, and I'll go the same way. I think for similar reasons. I think these teams are both good. The middle of the CCIW is very, very strong, but a 2-point line at home. I think Elmhurst will win. I expect them to win this game. So if it's by a bucket, then I think it's a push or better for me. So I went with Elmhurst as well. We've talked about the MAC Commonwealth a lot so far in this podcast, so here's one more game. It is York and Albright. This is just a 4-team conference tournament, so that is a matchup that happens right away. Albright 1-point favorites at home. Zach, your pick.
Well, this is maybe a sneaky matchup, a sneaky game that no one who watched this episode will have it sneak up on anymore. But I'm going to go with York on the bounce back performance. Give me YCP.
All right, Zach, I called out Albright for being hot. I think they're going to continue the streak. Just a 1-point line at home. I think they win this game. They've already beaten York twice this season. I think they go for the 3rd time. Give me the Albright Lions. Okay, we're going out to the NJAC. Stockton and TCNJ. Kind of maybe surprised to see Stockton as 5.5-point underdogs, even though it is on the road. We're not used to seeing that traditionally, but that's what it is right now. How do you see this one, though?
Yeah, it's the biggest point spread in the slate here, but I'm going to lay it. Give me TCNJ off that big win against Montclair State, to really show that the NJAC is back to maybe being a Montclair versus TCNJ race that, it kind of looked like it would be heading into the season, the first few weeks of the season. TCNJ for a while there didn't maybe keep pace with Montclair State. But I think that that had more to do with just Montclair State being really, really good, maybe even better than better than expected. I still really like TCNJ. I'm gonna lay the 5.5.
All right, Zach. I expect TCNJ to win this one, but 5.5 just felt too big for me. I think this can be maybe a one possession game. So just getting the 5.5 points, I felt comfortable picking Stockton here, even if they don't win. I'm not sure about that, but I think that they can keep it close. This is gonna be a fun matchup. All right, our game of the week, one that we called out. It's a quarterfinal out in the WIAC. Might be a loser leaves town. Not really sure about that. But it's Oshkosh 4-point underdogs on the road at UW Platteville. Your pick.
Yeah, I think that another must-win game. I think a little bit more on the Oshkosh side. They are on the road, right? So this is a different dynamic than the Elmhurst pick. 4 points to work with, but give me the Titans.
Okay. All right, Zach, I'm going to go against you on this one. I'm going to go with Platteville. It seems like the longer, this is just anecdotally, I don't have my numbers in front of me, but it seems like the longer that WIAC play has gone on, the more that Oshkosh has tended to lose these types of games. I know it's still a 4-point line, but I'm going to go with Platteville at home in a game that both teams feel like they're really going to need to maybe solidify that bid. So I'm going to go with the home team to cover that 4-point line.
Right.
That's our picks.
It's going to be a fun week to watch, Matt, because there's going to be so many great games that we just don't even know exactly what the matchups are going to be yet. We couldn't consider for our slate, but it's going to be a great week of basketball. Looking forward to it. Let's get out of here with a word of thanks, though, with thanking everyone who supports us through the Patreon platform at patreon.com/D3 Datacast. They make what we do possible, and we are certainly grateful for it.
Yeah, thanks to everyone on this list for joining with us in creating these episodes. Help us to post the data on d3datacast.com. There's no website on the ads. You can just go get the data, no paywalls. If you'd like to join as well, patreon.com/d3datacast. There's a $5 option and a $3 a month option. If you'd like to choose one of those, that'd be wonderful. We just love making these episodes for you and talking about D3 basketball.
Before we get out of here, special shout out to Jim Maloney and D3 B-Ball as new Great Job team supporters this week.
Yes, appreciate the shout outs and the new subscribers. Always like to see that. If you would like your name shouted out, head to that link that you see on your screen. But Zach, we're going to go and we're going to enjoy conference tournament week. So for right now, we're going to say, good job, team.